Good morning and welcome to Conversations with your friendly neighborhood Black Guys. I'm Keenan Mose.
And I'm Kiyoshi Taylor. Today we have a wonderful guest for you today, Dr. J, Dr. Jernigan, but we'll just be calling her Dr. J today. And she is an expert in language and linguistics, and she is a stand-up person at Stanford, graduated 99 from Alabama University, is that correct?
1993 from University of Alabama with my BA, and then 1998 from Stanford with my PhD.
Oh, wow, awesome. So I just want to start off with what made you get into linguistics? Like what drew you to language?
So, I think part of it started when I was relatively young. I started writing when I was 12. And I was always a big reader. So I can always remember reading, and I belonged to Book of the Month clubs and all of that kind of stuff. And then I guess around the age of 12, I thought I'd take my own hand to it and started writing poetry for the most part, which then led me to wanting to major in creative writing. And in the middle of that, there was this other thing that happened, which was I ended up becoming an exchange student in Germany in 1988. And so while I was a big reader, I also loved learning foreign languages. And so by the time I was 17, I'd learned Japanese, French, Spanish, Latin, and then I was in French class. My French teacher comes in, this is my junior year of high school, and says, "Who wants to be an exchange student in Europe?" And I thought she meant France, and it was actually Germany. But I thought, hey, what's another language? Why not? Let's go. And it was the hardest language I'd ever learned by far, just by far. And it really got me thinking, the exchange experience got me thinking about how our language really represents who we are as cultures, as people. Your identity is your language, and being a sort of non-native speaker surrounded by native speakers, you experience a whole new level of, let's say, distinguishing in and out groups. So then I began to understand the power of language and understand that anytime I talk to somebody who spoke a foreign language, that this is a person who has amazing courage and grace. And then learning on the other side that people use language to gatekeep. And I did not like that at all. So I first went and got my BA in German and creative writing so that I could write in a foreign language. And then when I came to Stanford, I sort of learned that it was more important to be on the side of helping people navigate and understand language than on the side of sort of just literature, right? That back then and still today, there's sort of a division between literature professors and language professors, like professors who teach foreign language or linguistics or acquisition. And I felt like the language side of that just created a whole lot of space in which to experiment, talk about race, class, identity, intersections, and then give people access to more worlds. If you can show people how to work with language, you give them keys to kingdoms that they didn't even know existed.
I'm actually curious. I'm actually curious about what it was like in Germany as a Black person, because in America, race means a lot and language around race, but being Black in another country, in a foreign country, what is that like? Are you Black? Is the language different? Like, I want to explore some of the linguistics of that.
So the first time I went to Germany was 1989, and I've lived there multiple times since then. I also lived in Vienna in like 1997. So 88, 89, 97 in Vienna, 2006 to 2007 in Germany, 2012 to 2013 in Germany, 2016 to 2019 in Germany. and living in different parts of the country. So I would say that one thing that remains consistent throughout the 30 years that I've been going to Germany and staying there is that Germany is a country that actually enshrined its language in law. It is the official language of the country, whereas in the United States, we don't have really an official language, which it really changes everything. And Germans take a huge amount of pride in their language, the complexity of it, its dexterity. And as such, it is a part of something called a Leitkultur, like a sort of overriding, overarching culture that defines Germans. And if you are Black in Germany, one, they don't think of you, it never occurs to them that you might actually be American, which is the funny part, because they listen to rap and hip hop and everything, right? But the place that they always go to first is Africa, right? So you must be from Africa. No, I'm not from Africa. Oh, come on, your father must be from Africa and your mother must be from Germany. And it's always the father who's from Africa and the mother is from Germany. That's always the most fascinating part to me. They've gotten a little bit more nuanced in their knowledge of the continent. So before I was just African, and then I became, you must be Moroccan, and then it went to, you must be South African. So we're seeing an evolution of racism here. The interesting part about it, and Ta-Nehisi Coates also talks about this in his book, Between the World and Me, is that when he went to France, he noticed the racism, but he knows that it's not custom made for him. And so when I'm living in Germany, I know that there's racism. It's just not custom made for me. It's custom made for African migrants, Turkish people. So once people understand that I am not African, the nature of the racism changes. It becomes much friendlier, so to speak. There's not as much of a hint of violence behind it or a desire to discriminate, especially when they learn that you have a PhD. So a PhD trumps everything in Germany, right? It trumps race, it trumps class, it trumps everything. If you have a doctor in front of your name, the world changes for you. But in order to have that doctorate, or in order to have that degree, you have to have access to the language. And so the combination of an advanced degree and fluency in German has made my life very different and easy in Germany. But people who come over who have the degree but no language skills never really get true entree into the society, which has its disadvantages. It's also problematic for people who live there and sort of grow up what we might call generation 1.5, in which the parents are from another country, but they were born in Germany, so they speak a variety of languages, and sometimes none of them perfectly. And Germans will hold that against a person of color all the way through their education, and it makes it very hard to get into college later.
Cool. You had brought up this term before, gatekeeping, when you were talking about language. How does that kind of play a role into you either being in Germany there or you being here? What is gatekeeping?
Gatekeeping is that demand from the dominant culture that you speak the way they want you to speak. And if you can't speak the way they want you to speak, they use that as the excuse to exclude you from the dominant culture, from the privileges afforded the dominant culture. So for example, if you are from the East Coast and you're African American and you speak a variant of African American vernacular English from the East Coast, and you come out to study on the West Coast, and so you say something like maybe fire, right? And then somebody says, what does that mean? That is the beginning of the gatekeeping process, right? Right there in that reaction to your verbal and your nonverbal communication, the sort of communicating of, you know, them feeling unwell or even a little annoyed or disgusted. They're telling you that you're not acceptable. Your language is not acceptable. And that idea that we encourage people to code switch. And I think we should code switch for a variety of reasons, but not necessarily because we have to make other people feel comfortable. So gatekeeping is a way of the dominant culture saying, I don't feel comfortable around you. You must change yourself linguistically in order to make me feel comfortable around you. And if you can't do that, I don't want to have anything to do with you.
Well, I think that's one of the things that makes America just somewhat the cultural and entertainment envy of the world, is because we have all these different words that mean basically the same thing, but depending on how you use each word, you
Right.
get a different reaction.
Right.
So, and so that, I see how that kind of ties into the gatekeeping. But my my question really is uh, do you see that kind of as a double-edged sword, mostly in terms of race relations, because we take everything in America so literal.
Right. I would say, based on my experience, like just my personal experience, moving between languages and between countries, and then being in the United States, having experienced what linguistic gatekeeping is like in another country and what linguistic gatekeeping is like here, there's not much difference. I think that if people are engaging in gatekeeping, they deprive themselves of an amazing, vast spectrum of resources. And they deprive themselves also of ideas that can't always be communicated in one standard language, right? Um, if you are invested in gatekeeping, then you are never going to truly enjoy the that you will hear in a conversation, right? Like that is a very specific thing. Or just, how people raise an eyebrow before they respond. Um, I see in memes and in GIFs and a lot of short videos online, I see a lot of reaction and pushback to that gatekeeping these days. So I think it's reducing. But I feel like academia, the private sector, a lot of places where we still really need to advocate and underscore diversity is still engaged in a lot of gatekeeping. And we're making progress. I just wish that it was a little bit faster.
That's very interesting. I definitely felt you into the like I can hear and feel that in a conversation. I can hear my mom saying that to me, and like I tell her something, sure you did. Uh, and you kind of talked about like off of the gatekeeping, like code switching and how that can be like a positive thing. And you kind of touched on with Kiyoshi's question, and I was kind of curious to how you use that to kind of further kind of get yourself accepted. You said like the PhD when you come in, like that makes you be accepted. That's kind of like the above everything. Do you find yourself code switching a lot kind of to help do that, or
No. And so once upon a time, when I was still very influenced by what other people thought of my language, I used to spend a lot of time trying to speak like a doctor, right? And I wanted to put on my Oxford Don coat, and I wanted to walk outside and talk about implications and socioeconomic ramifications and I just don't. And I gave myself a lot of agony trying to be that person to meet that degree. And at actually moving to Germany showed me that the degree is the proof that I already know what I'm doing. And I speak in simple terms. I have a tendency to speak in really simple terms. Um, it depends on my audience, which simple terms I will use, but I have a tendency to express myself relatively simply because I don't want to get caught up in a language that only a few people can speak, right? And I remember classes in graduate school where I just sort of sat there thinking, I think I know what they mean, but I'm not sure. And I really feel unsure raising my hand and asking. So I'm just going to sit here in this cloud of confusion. So I code switch in order to make sure that everybody I'm talking to understands what I'm saying all the time. I really do it with students. I'm Dr. J. I'm not Dr. Harriett Jernigan, who has a PhD from, I am, but I'm not. So when I'm talking to the students, I use really simple terms that speak to both of our mutual interests and values. When I talk to other people that I work with, I use my own idiolect. I use my own dialect. I do not try to switch, but it's a relatively simple one. So I find it, it's flexible. Now, depending on what I'd like to emphasize in which context, I will throw in an or even a little chicken head, right? Like I will do that. I want people to know who I am. For a long time, I did not really reveal the depth and the complexity of my linguistic interior life, which is a simple one peppered with all of these little tiny embellishments that come from all of these experiences, contexts, locations. I will say in the same conversation, I might use something from Ireland, like yiri, and then go on and use something from Scotland, like a boot, and then come back to my like it's all good to me. I like mixing it up as much as possible. And I think in doing that and keeping it simple, you can communicate with a lot of people. When I talk to my mother, and it's really funny because sometimes, especially working right now, I'll be talking to a student online and then my mother calls. And so I pick up the phone and I go, "Hey, Mom, I'll call you back in a little bit." So the voice changes, the tone changes, just a little something that mom recognizes, put the phone back down, start talking to the student again. So we do it all the time. It's just a matter of why. And I used to do it because I thought I had to. Now I do it because I want to.
I've got a couple of questions regarding what you teach, actually, because I saw you teach the rhetorics of ethnic and racial identity, and also speaking ironic truth to power, the rhetoric of the satirical protest. And I just, if I was a student right now, I would line up to take that class because of everything going on in our current climate of this country. So I guess what I want to ask is, well, I'm just kind of curious, like how your students respond to kind of how they value race today compared to, say, a couple decades ago. Is it becoming more fluent, as in we're all just kind of more human, or is it, are they proud to be Black? Are they, give me some of your thoughts on that.
I mean, I would say it has been amazing to watch the transformation over the last couple of decades. And here's an example. So obviously through osmosis and conversations with students, especially in the last 10 years, I've learned a lesson. So when we went online, I started using this program to create a video, and it's a hand that draws illustrations and on a whiteboard. You've probably seen it. And so when you go into the program, you can choose the type of hand that you want. So there's a white hand, there's sort of an olive complected hand, and then there's a Black animated hand, but no real Black hand, right? And I thought, I know my students are going to want to see the Black hand, but I don't necessarily want the Black animated hand, right? And then I talked to Dr. Starkman, and a couple of days later, there was a Black real hand. I'm pretty sure she made a phone call or something.
Shout out to Miss Professor Starkman.
Right. Shout out to Dr. Starkman. And so then I said, great. And I went and I used the Black hand to do the animations. The first thing my students said when they saw the video was, "Love the Black hand." So, and I thought, if it were me working with people of my age, it wouldn't have even occurred to me to worry about the color of the hand. The expectations are much higher now. And the expectations have a lot to do, especially with the generation that I'm working with right now. They had a Black president at the age of 7, right? The age of 8. During their formative years, they see what I think of as an anomaly, a Black president for 8 years. They think of that as the standard. There is a much louder call to be proud of who you are. The natural hair movement is an amazing representation of that. There are all sorts of different things happening in which students are saying, sorry about that. It's a text message, sorry about that. That there's a much larger expectation that we celebrate diversity, that you own who you are, that you live authentically, and that Black Lives Matter. I mean, that was not a statement that existed when I was growing up. That was not a statement that existed when I was in graduate school. And so just those ideas in general stand much more at the forefront, so that when I'm teaching, I am very much teaching for those voices, like giving, diverse groups of people who stand at multiple intersections a safe space in which to enjoy their education and enjoy it in a different way than it would normally be delivered. So, and there's also that call for different ways to educate, better forms of education, greater genres and modalities. And it's refreshing. It's very encouraging to see.
I mean, that's one of the things we're working on actually in Justice Vanguard is education. We're very education driven, and we're actually trying to get ethnic studies added to our high school district, or our former high school district, because we think that would be a great foundation. Now, rumor has it actually, though, that some of your work is put on display around Christmas.
You mean the Nativities?
So I'd like a little bit of information on this.
So I really do like satire. I still do a lot of writing. And about, I'd say 15, 16 years ago, I started doing satirical dioramas. And then I sort of landed on Nativities with Barbie dolls. And they usually address some issue or topic of the year, or tropes and stereotypes. So for example, when Obama got elected, I did a nativity that was a scale representation of the Amistad and had the revolution, the overthrow going on, and just to celebrate that. I did a nativity one year of the Tea Party and had them in a teacup and their little protest signs and all that kind of stuff. Last year was probably the most extreme one, which was Living While Black. And it was basically just a scene of a mass shooting. And then this past year that I just finished was called the Dumpster Fire 2020. So it's actually a dumpster fire, and then you open it up and you see the inside of someone's apartment. And so Mary is, everybody's Black, and then Mary is teaching and taking care of a child at the same time. Joseph is like intubated, like the Proud Boys are outside, like, protesting and beating on the walls. And they're gruesome. They're really gruesome. But in doing them with Barbie dolls sort of underscores how ridiculous all of it is, right? We use dolls to envision idyllic and ideal contexts and situations. And when you put them in realistic situations with a little bit of exaggeration and a lot of blood, then you really get to start having a strange conversation. So I make the nativity, then I have a party, people come over, we discuss, we eat. It's great. So this year I actually made a trailer for it. I can send you the link for the trailer.
Please do.
Let me see. While I'm here, I can like put it in chat for you, and then you can have a look at it later. But yeah, because of all of the developments in technology and being able to sit at home, I thought, why not? And so the trailer is done in the form of a horror film. So it's fun. But the idea is, just to, let's see, I'm copying it right now. Okay. The idea is to clap back in as many ways as possible. Like, it goes back to that idea of language. I'm somebody who speaks very simply. And I use my nativities to make very simple pictures of what people consider very complex ideas. These are not complex ideas. These are not complex problems. They can be solved really easily. And when you put it in that kind of context, you see how simple it is, right? You take away all of the political rhetoric, all of the doublespeak, all of the things that people like to put around it to obfuscate and avoid having the conversation. So I think that's probably the most important thing about the Nativities. And I like playing with dolls. So.
Oh, that's absolutely fan. I got one last question for you about social media. We all know there's a lot of polarization when you get on there, but I read in an article you actually thought it was a TikTok, I believe, was a good form of entertainment and kind of getting your message out there. So how is it in such a dumpster fire of that we can get a positive message and moreover a positive dialogue going using social media and the language we use in it, mostly on conversations about race?
Right. I think talk about a double-edged sword. Social media is a double-edged sword. That's, I think, one of the most challenging areas of just the modern era, Gen Y, Gen Z. I think that the best use of it is creating this content that creates communities. So, the nice thing about TikTok is there's no particular community, right? Algorithms, unfortunately, still play a role, so that I don't necessarily get to see what's going on in China because of the algorithm. So I have to really, make an effort to step outside of my comfort zone as established by the algorithm in TikTok, but it's there. So I think YouTube, TikTok are two of the most interesting platforms as far as creating content that then allows people to create affinity groups. Twitter, not so much. I know a lot of people are very much into Twitter. I just feel like Twitter it's so chaotic. It's so frenetic. And it's really easy to disseminate false information super quickly through Twitter, Insta, and Facebook. TikTok is usually about self-made content, which is what makes it so great. It's personal and usually involves responding to something else or just making a statement. The best example that I can think of from TikTok right now, as far as how people are using it to push forward positive discussions about race, class, gender, etc., is the woman who did a series of TikToks on, she created like an inverted pyramid, I think, how you go from being somebody who consumes regular media to being into conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism, right? I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a brilliant series. And that is something that people can do now, especially with, Zoom. Like, she makes very good use of her background. She comes up with a very colorful graphic. It's in digestible chunks, right? And I think that's really a huge part of it, is like, how can you make it digestible but dynamic? And so I think this combination of video, personal investment, and whether you use graphics or not, I don't think it's really a big issue, but that personal extension, that sort of reaching out to another person, not as an influencer, not as a model, not as a perfect person, but as yourself, living your authentic life. So I think those are the things that social media can really take advantage of, and that people can use in social media to have these conversations and also to affect change. Everything else still probably needs to be taken with a grain of salt and looked at with a critical eye. But a person giving their opinion is a person giving their opinion, a person synthesizing information. And when they say, this is my synthesis, then it's their synthesis. And I think it's a lot easier to sort of choose who you think you can have an authentic conversation with and who you think you can't. There's always going to be a lot of other noise. There's always going to be a lot of other noise. The question is, and we can't live without it. I don't necessarily want to live without the other noise. But I think that gives us a lot more space to just sort of see how people feel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we find you on TikTok though?
No. Here's the thing, is that I have so many things that I would like to do, but teaching takes up a ton of time. So I go and look at things that students have done. I go and look at Insta, I look at TikTok, I look at YouTube, but most of the time I'm just so busy talking to students and grading and setting up classes that I rarely get around to making my own content, which is how I end up having things like the Nativity and then the trailer.
Well, we thank you so much for giving us your time. Of course, we got to shout out again the amazing Ruth Starkman for connecting us.
Yes. Dr. Starkman!
We've been your friendly neighborhood Black guys. I'm Kiyoshi Taylor.
Keenan Mouse, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Dr. J, for being a part of this.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys on our next conversations.